on the participants box of your Zoom. Once you click on that, you'll see all of the participants as well as yourself. And you can click raise hand if you have any question, but we're gonna save some time towards the end as well to answer any questions that you might have when it comes to everything that we're talking about today. James, thanks for joining. All right, so Kellen, thanks for hitting the record button. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So again, happy Friday, everybody. It's been a fun 4 weeks doing this with everyone, and hopefully anyone who's been signing up and getting the recordings has been finding some good value in this. This is the 4th installation and the final installation of the running series that we've been doing. And today, the major goal is going to be to talk about load management and progression. So this is kind of just a recap of what we did in the past 4 weeks with the goal, again, of today, to just give a very, very general overview on how to manage your own training, how to manage your running. As we start to train and as we start to become more specific with what our goals are, training plans can change person to person, which we will touch on later. So today was more so just, again, that high level, some concepts that we can start to apply right away in the way that we're thinking about our training, in the way that we're thinking about running, and in the way that we're thinking about potentially progressing, especially because, again, don't want to keep hitting this on the head, but with quarantine, limited equipment, gym space, etc., running might be one of those things, not only as like a physical outlet, but a mental outlet as well. So if people are starting to make that progress, that load management and progression is going to be really important so that they continue to kind of push that envelope for themselves and be able to continue to get better at what it is that they're looking to do. Sorry. So before I jump into the load management stuff, this is just like a really, really quick recap, again, because some people are joining today that might have missed some of the other webinars and didn't get a chance to go through all of the recordings. But session 1, we talked mainly about running form. The key takeaway from that was that a lot of buzzwords around foot strike, overstriding, heel foot, forefoot, etc. One of the big things that I personally like to tell people and that we think about here is that more so think about where your foot is relative to your body. If you think about your entire body from basically your knees up, that's where all of the center of your gravity is hitting. So you don't want your foot to be too far in front of it just because you want a more efficient landing so that the muscles in your body can kind of help to attenuate those forces. And then in that session, we went through some coordination drills, mainly because they're a great way to warm up. They're a great way to get your body to understand foot placement and posture as you're doing the drills. Running is very rhythmic, so again, it kind of helps to drill in that motor control so that as you're running, that form is looking a little better and better. And then I also, again, in the first session, talked about how I like to add these coordination drills to the end of a run because as your body is fatigued, form is one of the first things to go. So if you can, do your 3-mile jog, let's just say, and at the end, as you're cooling off, implementing some of these coordination drills, it's kind of a good way to neurologically ingrain that good running form. Second thing that we talked about was the core, why it's important for the runner. Mainly from that, the takeaway was that the core, again, this whole entire midsection of our body needs to be stable so that the rest of our body can move efficiently. The example I gave was to kind of think about wiggling your fingers, right? Stable core, arms and legs can move. If the wrist is flopping around, really hard to control those fingers. So again, everything about the core for a runner is in relation to how the arms and the legs need to be rhythmically moving around it. And then the last thing that we did, which was last week, I thought was like a pretty good webinar just because strength training is something that a lot of runners can often neglect in terms of like what research and surveys show. But really strength training, especially during the off season, is going to be the currency that you're building up to pay those running tolls. And now we're going to move into load management. When I started thinking about this, one of the first examples that kind of popped into my mind was the whole, tortoise and the hare, especially because, we want to be slow and steady with the way that we're progressing our running and the way that we're progressing towards those goals. So this example kind of popped up mainly because I think with running, for me anyway, it's one of those things where you can see yourself getting better at it just visually, right? So it's like, okay, today I ran to the park. Tomorrow I ran into the park, and then the next day I ran through the park, right? So it's a very like tangible feeling. As you're doing it, you're starting to feel better. And a lot of times what ends up happening is like people will jump the gun a little bit and they kind of go from I just started running into thinking about, again, a lot of these buzzwords. What's my pace? How many days a week should I run? I'm really trying to like break mileage. And then you have the most common goals, right? Your first 5K, 10K, half, and marathon. So sometimes people might skip a few steps. So all that is to really say that with the slow and steady mindset in the beginning, especially for someone who is just picking up running, you still want to make sure that you're building up a baseline. You want to make sure that you're consistent with your running. And then when I say make a commitment, what I mean is in the beginning, rather than thinking about, again, your pace, your total mileage, trying to jump that gap and go from, 0 to 5K, for example, you want to do something like, okay, you know what? I'm going to aim to run 2 times a week for the next 2 to 3 weeks. Don't think about your mileage. Don't think about your pace. Just go out there and kind of get your body used to being consistent with your running. Like any other kind of like programming, whether it's strength or running, you need to be consistent for your body to continue to make those adaptations and level yourself up. And in the beginning, I think a lot of times beginners don't really know where to push and where to pull back a little bit. So some of the strategies that we like to implement to make it a little bit more objective is to either use your rate of perceived exertion, basically just a fancy way of saying on a 0 to 10 scale, how much energy are you using to perform the run that you're looking to run? So 0 is being, the equivalent of just like sitting here doing nothing. 10 is like max effort. You're completely gassed, cannot repeat that activity. So we tell people as you're starting to get more consistent with your running in the beginning, as you're building that baseline, try to keep yourself somewhere in that like 5-ish zone, 5 to 6, kind of like medium exertion. And then this way, you're not pushing yourself past a boundary that you might not be ready for yet as you're continuing to, again, build on top of that baseline. And again, one of the ways that we like to do this too is just with a simple run-walk strategy. Of course, you want to make sure that you're spending enough time on your feet, that your body is acclimating to the act of running. But if you're pushing past that exertion of a 6 and you're just taxing yourself out time and time again, you're not giving yourself a chance to, again, bring it back to baseline before you build it back up. So you're almost constantly knocking it down and not giving it a chance to build up. So some examples of this could be once you feel like in your run, you're pushing past that 6 out of 10, maybe you walk for about 30 seconds just to bring yourself back to that 5 and then start jogging again. Or especially when it comes to someone who might be dealing with a running related injury and we're trying to get them back onto the road, we like to implement a run walk strategy, like 2 minutes on, 1 minute off, because it allows us to kind of control some of the variables so that we're not saying the difference between, running 1 mile and 3, for example, that's a large window. But if we can keep it to a time-based thing, so it's like 2 on, 1 off for a certain number of rounds, we can kind of figure out where in that run some of those things might be happening. So if it's like, the 3rd round, that's basically telling us after about 6 minutes of running, something's going on where the person isn't feeling as good as they should. So again, just wanted to introduce some strategies that are good as you're starting to build up some of that consistency. And similar, kind of building on top of that and segueing into this, when you think about load management, think about that frequency versus mileage in the beginning, because you rather break up your run into multiple days for shorter durations at first, just because you don't want to do something where you try to run 5 miles, you go out one day, you're feeling fantastic and you hit that 5 miles. But again, if your body wasn't 100% ready for that just yet, that 5 miles might make it really difficult for you to run even 2 or 3 miles in the next 1 or 2 days. So it's a good way for us to control some of those things and say, rather than try to run 5 miles in 1 day or 2 days, you break it up into 3 or 4 days so that you're only averaging 1.5 miles each day as you're kind of building up that baseline, doing it in slightly smaller chunks so that your body doesn't kind of jump into the deep end right away, and kind of doing this for the first few weeks just to see how your body responds, especially because there's other things in your life that's going on outside of running, which can play into all of like the recovery and things like that as well, that we'll be touching on later on in this presentation. So the other big thing too, as you're starting to run, as you're starting to feel good, you're getting a little bit more frequency under your belt, you're going out there, you're committed to that 2-3 times a week. You're starting to feel pretty good with the runs. Like I said, running for me anyway can be a very like visual thing, because I'm thinking, okay, I'm getting a little bit further each time, especially if I'm running a route that's familiar to me. So really quickly, a lot of times when people start to run, it's a great thing that once they start to feel good, they want to run that first race. They want to see how they're able to translate just going out for a run into that race environment. So, running a 5K, 10K, and half marathon is probably like the first big, I guess, like really, really major run for most people. The natural progression would be, of course, to run that first 5K run that 10K before getting into a half marathon. But in any case, all of those things require you to make like an actual plan now. So in the beginning, the plan was to just be frequent with your running, just committing to 2 to 3 days a week of getting onto your feet and going out there and building that baseline. Now that you have that baseline, you want to be able to create an actual plan. The more goal oriented you can be in your training. So again, whether that's getting stronger, losing weight, or running that first race, that goal at the end gives you a time frame so that we can reverse engineer what are the things that need to happen in order for us to accomplish that goal. So having that plan is going to give you the framework, give you some structure, and keep you consistent in your training so that you're continuously logging those miles in a way that is, again, making sense for where you are with work, etc., and not just haphazardly trying to get to some end destination. Typically, too, when it comes to making a plan, at this point, if the goal is to train, and I'm going to use a half marathon as an example, we like to tell people, if possible, that they should have been averaging a baseline of about 10 to 12 miles per week before marathon or half marathon training starts, just because this way we know that the body is prepared for all of the running that it's going to need to go through in order to accomplish that goal. So again, right, this is very high level. This isn't to say that you need to be averaging that because your goals might be different at the time that you're looking to run this race. But typically, we want to make sure that that baseline is there. Similar concept would be, if we meet somebody for the first time who's never strength trained before, I'm not going to give them the heaviest weight in the room. I'm going to see what their baseline is. And if they have a baseline already, then we know that we can kind of challenge them a little bit more and push them a little bit harder as they start to go through a formal training plan. So this is an example of the first 4 weeks of a half marathon plan that I kind of just quickly wrote up. So in this example, like I said, you're already averaging about 10 to 12 miles a week for maybe 2 to 3 months, because we know now that you've been consistently running. We know that your body is able to handle how much running you're going to need to take on. So I like to write plans depending on, again, the race, but for a half marathon, average training plan could be anywhere from 16 to 18 weeks, depending on the history of the person running, depending on how much training they've had. But it gives you a good framework for how long it should take to accomplish that goal. And again, very general statements here, because these things might change depending on what's going on with everything else in your life. And I like to do my training plans in 4-week chunks, just because if you see the whole 16-week plan, sometimes people will end up feeling like, oh man, if I missed one day or 1 week and that plan was deviated a little bit, that means that I'm not going to hit the goals or hit the milestone that I want to hit. And that's not always the case, again, because the body, the way that it works with running and anything else, you're going to go through fluctuations. So every week when you're planning these things, you don't want to make the assumption that every single week is going to be a perfect week. Having a bad day at work, working longer hours, you might have children and things like that. So because those things get into the mix, I'd rather do the plan 4 weeks ahead, knowing what the end goal is at the end of 16 weeks, but not making somebody feel or making yourself feel like you have to hit every single milestone, because life is going to throw curveballs at you. And it's a little bit easier to digest that, okay, in these 4 weeks, this is what I did. I feel pretty good about it. The next 4 weeks, this is what I'm going to do, and I can feel good about it, versus, again, feeling like you're tied to one extremely rigid structure for your running plans. So in this plan that I have here, and typically, again, with a distance run like this, on average, you want to do about 3 days a week of running. 2 are going to be a shorter run, and 1 is going to be a longer run, because you're thinking that you need to start to acclimate your body to that longer distance, and again, building it over time. So on average, what we like to see is we look at total mileage for the week. So if you take a look at the right-hand column for total miles, you're running on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then your long run is on a Saturday. So you're averaging 10 miles for that first week. Again, if you've been doing this and consistently doing it, that's already what you've been averaging. And even though that's what you're averaging already, we still want to start at a baseline so that we continue to progress that longer run from that starting point, versus jumping too deeply into it right away, especially because we have the full 16 weeks. So now when you look at that total mileage, we like to increase that total mileage, not just on one day, but over the course of the week by about anywhere from 12 to 20%. And again, these numbers are just your running average. It doesn't need to abide by that, but the goal here is to progressively increase your total mileage so that your body is acclimating to that longer distance that you need to run. And I personally have used a 3-up one down structure, just because you want to build on that long run. So if you'll notice, week 2, we have 11 total miles for the week. And Tuesday and Thursday are still fairly the same. We're adding roughly a mile to that Saturday long run. And then the following week, we're getting 12.5 miles. And now I'm changing it a little bit, where Tuesday is that nice, easy run. Thursday, we're adding an extra mile. Saturday, we're adding only half mile. So again, this helps us to build our total mileage, but distribute it in a way where, you're not taking all of that pounding on just that one day. Of course, as you progress, your Saturday long runs are going to get longer and longer and longer, but your total week's mileage is going to always be distributed amongst the 3 days a week that you're going to be running. And really, really important to highlight here is that down week. Whether it's every fourth week in this case, or every third week, you want to make sure that that down week, you're dropping the mileage just a little bit for the total week. You want to make sure that you're able to be consistent in the run still to get the legs turning, but that down week is going to be helpful for all of the recovery things. Again, you don't always want to knock down. You need your body to be able to build itself back up. So those down weeks are really important. It's almost like an active rest week versus completely taking off, because you're still going to go out there and run, but you'll see that all of the mileage for the entire week has dropped just a little bit, and even under the total miles that your baseline is already starting with, just because we don't want to keep pounding on the body too hard as we're doing this. So just pause here for a second, let you guys take a look. Again, this is going to be recorded, and if you guys have questions towards the end, happy to answer those. So now when it comes to load management, I wanted to kind of re-bring up the fact that running and strength are two things that need to happen hand in hand. I'm going to quickly flip back, but you'll notice on here, there are rest days, of course, and then there are strength days and mobility/strength days in the mix. Just because I'll use the example again, don't want to sound like a broken record here, but strength and that baseline strength is really the currency for all of the miles that you're putting on. Running essentially is jumping foot to foot. There's never a point in that run where both of your feet are in contact. So you're really taking load through your body, through your hips, through your knees, through your feet, jumping step to step over the course of many, many miles. So if you looked at the plan, most of your days are going to be running, because 80% of your training should be sport specific, right? So like even thinking about a football player, you need to train football activities to get better at football, but football players are still in the gym strength training to build the capacity they need for their sport. And in the case with the runners, a lot of research shows that although they're extremely athletic, running is a very athletic activity, an activity mentally, but also physically, being endurant. Most runners tend to only run and they don't focus on that strength training. But again, in that example, you need to strength train a football player to do football activities. You need to strength train a runner to do running activities. And again, that's going to help you build that good baseline for you to be able to log those miles and build up that tolerance to the activities that you're putting it through. Now, again, just think about load management. We get these questions a lot about your warming up and your cooling off and your stretching. So one of the main things that we get asked a lot of times is, do we stretch before or after a run? And the title says it all. A warm up is meant to warm you up, whereas stretching is meant to kind of cool you down. In the beginning, the goal of a warm up is to get you active, is to get blood pumping, is to prime the muscles that you need to do the activity that you're going to do. So if I'm looking at running, for example, I'm not going to go and do bicep curls, because that's not getting my legs ready for the activity that I needed to do. Really, the big things are to, again, prime the muscles, increase your heart rate and your blood flow so that you're bringing oxygen and nutrient-rich substance to those muscles that are going to be used as you're running. And then the stretching can happen afterwards, because stretching is more of that cool down. You're trying to get the body to relax after you've kind of like turned it up. With running or any other type of resistance training or activity, you're turning the dial up on all of your nervous system things, right? So more blood, faster heart rate, etc. Stretching is going to help to cool you down, turn that dial down a little bit so that your body can fully recover, feel a little bit relaxed at the end. Research also shows too that if you're just statically stretching before any kind of like sport activity, you might actually decrease your performance, just because even neurologically, you're taking your muscles from a position of length and relaxation and then asking it now to go run, jump, and do something. So it's almost like turning the switch from a neuromuscular factor from one end all the way to the other. So think about your dynamic warm-up, being more dynamic, doing some of the coordination drills that we showed you guys from the first webinar, doing things, you know, like some butt kicks. You can even do like brisk walking or a slow jog first. And in the research that I've done, people love to use a warm up roughly about 5 to 10 minutes at the very least before you start your run. And I don't know if anybody here has had this happen to them, but on the days where I will admittedly just go out there, do a very, very short warm up and start my run, I don't tend to feel like I'm in stride or feel good until about that 8th or 9th minute, or roughly for me, my first mile. And that's because at that point, after that 10 minutes, my body is now warm enough to feel like I want to continue running. So that's kind of like a good example if you've ever dealt with that, where you kind of tell yourself, or you say to, you know, your friend that you're running with, like, man, I didn't really feel good, or I didn't really feel like I got into my stride until that first mile. And that's because it takes you roughly that 10-ish minutes to get there before your body is almost like ready for the activity, starting from that point on. So think about it that way. Keep your warm up dynamic. Make sure you're priming those muscles and getting it ready for the activity. And then with load management, one of the big things here, not just managing the amount of progression you're doing, but managing, again, that recovery and those down weeks. Recovery is definitely super, super important, just because you need your body to down regulate a little bit from all of the up regulating it's doing when you're running or doing all of your training. So in the plan that I have an example to go, there's 1 to 2 days of rest baked into that. There's things for cross training and mobility, but you don't always have to think about your rest as like full blown rest. You can also do like active recovery days, and active recovery days are also in those slower runs, right? So your Tuesday and Thursday easy runs are almost like that active recovery. And then on those other days where you're more of like a true rest day, you don't need to just be doing nothing. You can choose to do something a little bit more low energy or low impact, like cycling or swimming, to kind of continue to work on building up your heart rate. You don't want to go out there and give it everything you've got on a cycle or anything like that, but feel free to get on a bicycle, you know, take like a 20-minute Peloton class with a little bit lower resistance or something like that, just to make sure that your feet are turning, your heart rate is still getting challenged, but you're just thinking like you're not taking impact activity with the running and jumping foot to foot. So that's more of that active recovery. And then 2 things that maybe, I don't know if they're overlooked in your life, but good sleep and hydration are probably more important than any of the foam rolling, any of like the ice baths and things like that that you can do. All of those things are great because they do help to, again, calm the tissue down, help to decrease any inflammation that might be happening as we're logging those miles. But nothing's going to beat just like getting some good rest, getting some good hydration, and then making sure that you're fueled for your runs, which I didn't write down here, but very, very important. You want to make sure, again, that your body has the energy to perform the task that you're asking it to perform. So make sure that as you're running, you know, you're eating something, just even like toast and peanut butter about 30 minutes before you run or something like that, just that your body has the energy that it needs to do what it has to do. And similar, I'm reusing this slide from our last presentation just because we were talking about strength training. All of this is going to be a very personal approach when it comes to planning your actual marathon or half marathon training plan. So we need to understand, and you also need to understand where you are in life, where you are with your training in order to build that plan to make sure that we're as efficient as we can be. You know, there's no 100% science on how we can prevent injury. All we can do is prepare ourselves as much as we can to make sure that those injuries don't occur. That's going to come with, again, the core training, coordination drills, all of the strength training, and then a good plan with that active recovery in between. So when it comes to, you know, knowing who you are, knowing where you are, working with us, we're trying to get to understand you. Is this your first 5K? Are you trying to break a PR? Are you an elite marathon runner? There's going to be a big difference if you're, you know, a younger, maybe high school or college student versus someone who's juggling a job and a parent, right? So your training plan might need to factor in different things, and your progression might need to be a little bit different, especially with strength training experience as well. So if you don't have that baseline already, we need to know that we need to build that in a way that's comfortable for you while you're continuing to run. And then that segues into the in-season versus off-season training. So maybe for a beginner, this might be, your training might completely be starting from point A and trying to get to point Z. So you're mixing in cross training and running, both of those things for the first time. So we need to know where you are with your training in order to build out that plan so that you're not double taxing the body and asking it to do too much. Versus off-season training, we might be leaning a little bit more heavily towards the resistance training. So again, build that baseline up for you, build that currency for the tolls before you get into in-season where most of your training is going to be running. So a lot of things that we try to factor into the mix as we're building out that plan. and trying to like space out the days in a way that makes sense for you, makes sense for your goals, and where you are in terms of like your running experience. So in terms of, I just have this slide in here, what to do next, you're more than welcome to always reach out to us. Right now, we're doing 20% off all telehealth services. If you want to like, hop on a call, we can do a Zoom session to just, again, get to know you a little bit more, get to know what your goals are. You have our information here, info@FitClub. Follow us on Instagram. All of these webinars, like I mentioned, have been recorded, so you can kind of watch them on your own time, maybe learn some of the drills and some of the exercises that we introduced in those webinars, just as a good way to kind of bake into your plan now, especially if you're just starting to pick up running. That kind of wraps it up. Hopefully that wasn't too much information all at one time. I know that a lot of these things, we can dive really deep into them basically. And I think that that's where getting to know you is going to be more helpful because your goals are specific to you and they're different person to person. So this webinar, to wrap it up, like I said, is just very high level to give you some information on what it is you can start to do now. We wanted to make it information based, but we also wanted to provide some practical value to it as well. So you guys have a little bit more direction and a little bit more framework into some of the things that you can be implementing into your run training to make it a little bit more efficient, make it fun still. And then of course, always trying to think about being injury free. Building up that baseline so you guys can keep going out there and pounding the pavement. So we're going to leave some time. Thank you again for everyone who's joining. It's really nice out today, so hopefully get outside and maybe do a run later. But if you guys have any questions, feel free to throw up a hand.
Hi guys. Hi John. Hi Kellen.
What's up, James?
I see you in the office. How long has it been open so far? Since phase 2?
I want to say like 6 weeks now, maybe.
Wow. And I didn't get an email. So
no email. We definitely sent out an email. We'll definitely yeah, James, let me know if you didn't get that. But we sent out a bunch of emails. So
okay.
let us know. Yeah, we're definitely open, man. If you're interested in coming in, we can help you out for sure.
Yeah. I mean, coming into the city is a little tougher these days. Working from home and also just mentally, I guess. I honestly haven't been in the city since this whole thing started. But it's good to see that you guys have reopened. As you know, I started a new training cycle about 2 months ago. For the fall racing season, but with COVID, I kind of had to modify my training a little bit, and I've had a few setbacks, and I'd like to come in eventually to go over them. I'm experiencing a lower back nerve issue right now, so I had to kind of put my training on pause. Still trying to get some runs in. About I would say a half marathon volume, just to get some mileage in, keep myself active. But it's not as productive as a full training plan. I suppose like right now I'm just maintaining my fitness, but
hey James, all right, I want to make sure like if these are questions that are going to be very specific to your current training plan, maybe we can set up some time. I know that getting to the clinic might be difficult, but maybe we can do a telehealth session with you either like later today or next week, so we can kind of go through these things in more detail. Did you have a specific question about anything that was happening for this particular presentation?
No, I liked how you mapped out recommendations for each specific training goal, whether it's a half marathon plan or full marathon plan. But I didn't have any specific questions. I just wanted to chime in since it's been a while.
Yeah, man, for sure. And definitely appreciate that. It's been a while since we've worked together, so it sounds like you're dealing with a few things. Definitely happy to jump on, a more personal Zoom session so that we can help you through some of this stuff. Just because I know that running is very important for you, as it might be for some of the other people that are joining this session.
Okay, sounds good.
Does anybody else have a question about some of the things that we presented today? And if there's nothing in particular right now that you're thinking about, again, feel free to email us after this if you watch this again or think of something a little bit further down the line. Again, I'm going to encourage everybody to try to watch some of the webinars early on, just because there's some pretty good information in that as well. And that might start to jog some questions that you might have. And we're here happy to help you guys, happy to answer those questions for you, and happy to, offer up any telehealth services that you might need. Just because, as James mentioned, it might be a little bit difficult to kind of travel right now, depending on where you live, working from home, etc. But we're here, ready to help. Happy to get to know you guys a little bit more. Happy to know where you are in your journey with running and any issues that you might have. That's what we do, right? Happy to help you get through them and make sure that you're able to do the things that you love doing. And then again, just as a reminder, even though all of these races are unfortunately canceled, these organizations are trying to do great things. And doing things virtually, just because that seems to be the way of the world right now. Being able to offer up some of these virtual races, I think, is a great way to still be able to give to the community, especially the running community, since this is something that's an amazing time, right? Anybody who's experienced any marathon, but especially for me, close to home, the New York Marathon is an amazing day, and it's an amazing week, right? The energy is great, so it's great to see that some of these companies are still offering that. Even if it's in a virtual way. I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of communities out there looking to get on the road. So yeah, we'll stay tuned to see what happens in the fall. Yeah, any questions? Like I said, info@FitClubNY. Feel free to reach out to us. I hope you guys have a great Friday. For anyone who has watched the webinars, I really hope that you enjoyed it. Hope that I was able to provide some value to you guys in your training and give you a little bit more information and maybe some perspective on the things that you're trying to achieve. So yeah. Looking forward to working with any of you, and enjoy the rest of your day.